So let's begin with our invocation. Ya Devi Sarvabhuteshu Shaktirupena Sanstita Ya Devi Sarvabhuteshu Shantirupena Sanstita Ya Devi Sarvabhuteshu Matrirupena Sanstita Namastasyai 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 Namo Namah Om Namo Namah Nirambikaya Om Namo Bhagavate Shri Aravinda Shri Aravinda Sharanam Mama Shri Aravinda Sharanam Mama Shri Aravinda Sharanam Mama. So our topic for today is self-regard, love, and the power of now. We begin with Mother's words that depression is always a sign of acute egoism. Let's pause here and think about why this is so. Why is egoism always a sign of acute egoism? Why is depression always a sign of acute egoism? Any answers? Why is depression always, or why are depressed people necessarily very egoistic people? Any answers?
We are thinking about ourselves only in the depressed
Yes,
state.
Aditya. Sri Aurobindo and Savitri says, wherever there is ignorance, there suffering too must come. And the most fundamental ignorance is that we think we are this I, separate from the rest. So wherever there is too much self-regard, too much what will happen to me, how do I look, what will people say, etc., etc., wherever there's a very pronounced thought about me, that is ego. Ego is not just arrogance. That's a very superficial way of understanding ego. Ego is extreme self-regard. The more self-regard you have, more self-look you have, more this constant obsession of I, me, myself, what will happen to me, how did I look, what should I do, how will I progress, the more I'm somehow bound into the ignorance of ego. So we come to Toll's words, the realization that the normal state of mind of most human beings contains a strong element of what we might call dysfunction or even madness. Certain teachings at the heart of Hinduism, perhaps, come closest to seeing this dysfunction as a form of collective mental illness. They call it Maya, the veil of delusion. Raman Maharishi, one of the greatest Indian sages, bluntly states the mind is Maya. Buddhism uses different terms. According to the Buddha, the human mind in its normal state generates dukkha, which can be translated as suffering, unsatisfactoriness, or just plain misery. He sees it as a characteristic of the human condition. Wherever you go, whatever you do, says the Buddha, you will encounter dukkha, and it will manifest in every situation sooner or later. So the Buddha says, so long as you have not worked on your consciousness, your chitta, purified it of ignorance, sooner or later suffering will catch up with you. Dukkha will come to you wherever you go. And Toll is talking about a collective human dysfunction. That What is that collective dysfunction? Let's read further. It is important to realize, however, that fear, greed, and the desire for power are not the dysfunction that we are speaking of, but are themselves created by a dysfunction which is deep-seated collective delusion that lies within the mind of each human being. What is this delusion? The sense of I, that I exist separate from the others. This is the root of all our misery. A number of spiritual teachings tell us to let go of fear and desire, but those spiritual practices are usually unsuccessful. They haven't gone to the root of the dysfunction. Fear, greed, and desire for power are not the ultimate causal factors. Trying to become a good or better human being sounds like a commendable and high minded thing to do. Yet, it is an endeavor you cannot ultimately succeed in unless there is a shift in consciousness. This is because it's still part of the same dysfunction, a more subtle and rarefied form of self enhancement, of desire for more, and a strengthening of one's conceptual identity, one's self image. To do good also becomes quite an ego trip for many of us. You do not become good by trying to be good, but finding the goodness that is really within you and allowing that goodness to emerge. It can only emerge if some fundamental changes in your consciousness are made. So now we come to Sri Aurobindo's understanding of the ego, very important passage from the Synthesis of Yoga. Ordinarily, we conceive of ourselves as a separate I in the universe that governs a separate body and mental and moral nature, chooses in full liberty its own self-determined actions, and is independent and therefore sole master of its works and responsible. It is not easy for the ordinary mind, the mind that has not thought or looked deeply into its own constitution and constituents. It is difficult even for minds that have thought but have no spiritual vision and experience to imagine how there can be anything else in us truer, deeper, and more powerful than this apparent I and its empire. But the very first step towards self knowledge, as towards the true knowledge of phenomena, is to get behind the apparent truth of things and find the real but masked, essential, and dynamic truth which their appearances cover. So, Sri Aurobindo is saying that The I is as if so stuck to the skin of our consciousness that it's difficult to even imagine that this I doesn't really exist, that this I is a mental construct, that this I has no ontological reality. This ego or I is not a lasting truth, much less our essential part. It is only a formation of nature, a mental form of thought centralization in the perceiving and discriminating mind. Thought centralization, what is something that centralizes? It pulls everything into a center. So the ego is that mechanism in the mind which makes me believe that everything is happening to me, that I am the doer. It centralizes all experiences around itself. So ego, Sri Aurobindo has said very insightfully, is a centralizing tendency of the consciousness, uh, a form of physical conscious reception, centralizing substance and function of substance in our bodies. All that we are internally, all that we internally are, is not ego but consciousness, soul, or spirit. The Purusha, all that we internally are, is the Purusha, consciousness or soul or spirit. All that we externally and superficially are and do is not ego but nature, Prakriti. If we are made up of an inside and an outside, everything we are inside is spirit or Purusha. Everything we are outside is nature or Prakriti. So if our inside and outside is not the ego, there's really no place for the ego to exist. An executive cosmic force shapes us and dictates through our temperament and their results. Truly, we do not think, will, or act, but thought occurs in us, will occurs in us, impulse and act occur in us. Our ego sense gathers around itself, refers to itself all this flow of natural activities. It is a cosmic force. It is nature that forms the thought, imposes the will, imparts the impulse. Our body, mind, and ego are a wave of that sea force in action and do not govern it, but by it are governed and directed. The sadhak in his progress towards truth and self-knowledge must come to a point where the soul opens its eyes of vision and recognizes this truth of ego and this truth of works. So just read these words of Sri Aurobindo on your own and internalize them. So, as the Buddha says, thought happens, but there's none who thinks. Speech happens, but there's none who speaks. When he says none, he's saying there is no separate person there who is speaking or thinking. All is part of one whole through which various actions are happening. So we go ahead. Jesus speaks of the innermost I am, the essence identity of every man and woman, every life form, in fact. So, the essence identity of every man and woman, every life form is I am, aham, not ahankar. The akar the aham takes becomes the ego. So, ahankar is a mental construct. But what has an ontological reality is aham, I am, I exist. But the fact that I am Anahita who has these qualities, this form, that's imagination and conditioned concepts in my mind. He speaks of the life that you are. Some Christian mystics have called it the Christ within. Buddhists call it your Buddha nature. This I am that Jesus speaks of, Buddhists call it your Buddha nature. Christians call it the Christ within. Hindus call it Atma, the indwelling God. When you're in touch with that dimension within yourself, and being in touch with it is your natural state, not some miraculous achievement, all your actions and relationships will reflect the oneness with all life that you sense deep within. So ahankar will shrink you into I am within this skin. But aham is universal and everywhere, and it connects you with all life. All your actions and relationships will reflect the oneness with all life that you sense deep within. This is love. Laws, commandments, rules, and regulations are necessary for those who are cut off from who they are, the truth within. They prevent the worst excesses of the ego, and often they don't even do that. So when you're cut off from this law of oneness, you need others to give you parameters of right and wrong. You need a code of morality to keep you from doing wrong. But when you are in that state of Shuddh Aham, which is the same as oneness or love, you don't need those moral guidelines. Saint Augustine said, love and do what you will, because when you're really in that state of oneness, you cannot do wrong. Words get much closer to the truth than that. So, this reminds me of a conversation I was having with a young student of mine, remarkable boy, hardly 18, 19. And I'm sharing this to tell you that while we see very ugly things happening in the world, there are beautiful things also happening. Like in Savitri, Sri Aurobindo writes, uh, men shall know not its coming till the work is done, and wise men will talk and sleep while God grows. I'm not saying it verbatim, I don't, but something to that effect. So this boy, total chaos when I taught him in school. And I remember he hated Shavasana so much that every time we do Shavasana, he'd make an excuse and go off to the loo. But he happened to be out of town, and few months back, he called me and said that during the lockdown, he's been doing his school from a place, a beautiful green setting out of Bombay. And once, when he was very agitated, whatever he remembered of the Shavasana, he started doing it, and it really helped him to quieten down. And then one day, when he was in open fields, suddenly his consciousness just shifted, unasked for. He said, "It's like I was given this gift without my asking for anything. Suddenly, I just felt I was everywhere in the grass, everywhere." And he said, "I just fell in love with everything." And he said, something of that state has stayed no matter what. And 2 days and a week back, when I was talking with him, he told me that, "Miss, I feel that there is something that's fundamentally wrong and there's something that's fundamentally right." And I was telling him that I don't really feel there's such strongly etched right, wrong, and right, because what's right in my universe may be wrong in your universe and vice versa. So he said, "No, I feel it's wrong to harm another in every universe." But I said that, suppose in hit, like he said, it's wrong to hit someone, for instance. But I said, suppose an enlightened master comes along and hits you and lips off some karma by hitting you, would you call it wrong? But we kept disagreeing. But he must have stayed with this conversation. So he called me 2 days back and he said, "I have a feeling we are both saying the same thing, but it's words that are getting in the way." So I asked him that, he said that at a being level, there's no right and wrong. But when we are manifesting, when we are interacting, then in an objective way, there is right and wrong. So I asked him that, what would you say is the one universal thing which is an eternal right? One umbrella under which everything we can say is right. So we came to the conclusion that the only thing which we mustn't violate is our sense of oneness. And the only wrong is to act as if I'm separate from you and to profit at your cost. Because finally, we are all one. And when I feel separate from you and I'm thinking of only my benefit at your cost, so we both agreed that violating oneness is the only wrong there is. And Vedanta, it said, right, the only sin is duality, when we see somebody as separate. So this boy again said something so beautiful. He said that where the big Miss Anahita is, and the big, let's call him Arjun, I don't want to give his name. He said, where the big Miss Anahita is and the big Arjun is, we are the same. There is no difference. But where the small Miss Anahita is and the small Arjun is, Miss Anahita lives in her own universe, Arjun lives in his own universe, and Arjun has his own set of right and wrong, and Miss Anahita has her own set of right and wrong. But where the big Miss Anahita is and the big Miss Arjun is, we are one. There, all parameters become one. So I thought that was so beautiful, that where our larger selves are, those larger selves merge into oneness. But the surface smaller selves will go on having different parameters of right, wrong, good, bad. And these are the kind of magical things that are happening in the world. But boys like this will not, you won't hear stories of it in the newspapers. The newspapers will talk about war and whatever. But these kind of awakenings are happening all over the world. And that's something that should give us a lot of hope. Wise men will talk and sleep while God grows up. That's a line in Savitri. So, coming back to our screen share, what this boy, pseudonym Arjun, was saying is this: love and do what you will, said Saint Augustine. Because when you love, when you act out of that sense of oneness, Your parameters of right and wrong can be very different from moral parameters. And we see this in Mahabharata. If you look at Krishna, he did not behave in a very moral way. He made Yudhishthir lie. He pulled every string that there was to pull to establish dharma because he was working from a wisdom that transcends our human standards of morality, right and wrong. He was acting from love and oneness. So the words, first love and then do what you will, because whatever you'll do out of that love cannot be wrong. And love means not just this excessive feeling of, oh, I adore you, oh, I need you. Love is a sense of oneness. When I don't feel separate from you, then I can say I love you. Words cannot get much closer to the truth than that. It has been said God is love, but that is not absolutely correct. God is the one life in and beyond the countless forms of life. So, Toll is saying very insightfully, it's not absolutely correct to say God is love. God is oneness. And love is nothing but a corollary of oneness. God is the one life in and beyond the countless forms of life. Love implies duality, lover and beloved, subject and object. So, love is the recognition of oneness in the world of duality. This is the birth of God into the world of forms, of form. Love makes the world less worldly, less dense, more transparent to the divine dimension of the light of consciousness itself. Any questions? Anything to share? Okay, then we go ahead. Oh, this is a gem from Savitri. I haven't found a better definition for love for myself. And love is a yearning of the one for the one. So I think when I'm loving you from my surface, my form loves your form. I love you because of certain qualities you have. And that love is quick to change when I don't see those qualities at future moments. But the real love beyond that surface love is the love of my depth, which is one with your depth. And the one, the God in me yearning for the God in you, is love. Love is a yearning of the one for the one. When I start glimpsing myself in you and reaching out for myself in you, that is love. And love is a yearning of the one for the one. And beauty is a sweet difference of the same. And oneness is the soul of multitude. So you see, hatred isn't the opposite of love. Division is the opposite of love. To feel myself very separate from you is the opposite of love. And very often in partnerships, when there's possessiveness, clinging, that's the asuric deformation of love. The asura will love by wanting to possess the object of love. But the Daivic affirmation of love is when I want to give myself to the object of love, when I want to become one with it, not just possess it into my magnified ego. So you see, the way we love with our surface is such a contradiction to what love is really meant to be in its essence. And love is a yearning of the one for the one, and beauty is a sweet difference of the same. And oneness is the soul of multitude. So beautifully, Sri Aurobindo says, unity is the substance of the heart. In the psychic being, the heart, there's a natural knowing that there's a unity. So you do good not for the sake of doing good, not out of altruism, not out of wanting to feel good that I did good. But it's like if my hand is hurting and I massage it, I won't feel I'm being good in massaging it, right? It's a natural thing to do. When I feel everyone is an extension of myself and I reach out to solace or whatever, it's not even called solacing, it's just a natural thing to do, then I can't really say I feel I'm good doing it. It's a natural thing to do, there's no good or bad to it. Unity is the substance of the heart. So now we've said so far that the ego, we've said so far that all our unhappiness is caused by a heightened sense of I. That the more I'm obsessed with the self regard of this I, and I may be a very good, kind person, but I can still be a very egoistic person. And in Mother's work, somebody who may not be overtly very good and kind, but is not so self absorbed, is a more conscious person than a person who's overtly very good and kind, but is always obsessed with how good and kind he is. Are you getting what I'm saying? Because goodness is also a very tricky, shining trap. If we are being good just to feed our ego, to feel good about ourselves, to be seen as good by others, we are actually becoming more unconscious. There's a very simple definition of consciousness. One of them, the less self regard I have, the more conscious I am. The more I keep thinking of I, how did it just makes me unconscious. So, Sri Aurobindo starts by saying depressed people are highly egoistic people. And then further, he goes on to say that the ego doesn't exist, it's a mental construct. It doesn't have an ontological reality. Then, what are we really beyond the ego? So, let's have a look at that. If we are not the ego, what are we really? The awakened mind, these are Karen Miller's words. The awakened mind has two attributes. One is compassion, what somebody would call love. And that love is, Pamela Bloom beautifully says that compassion is not about help going from me to you, but it's about dissolving the abyss that separates me from you. When I really feel one with you, however I interact with you will be an act of compassion. Compassion is not something I will to do. It becomes my second nature, like hair growing on my skin. The awakened mind has two attributes. One is compassion, what some would call love. The other is clarity, what some would call sight, darshan. They are not really two things. Each is a function of the other. Funny thing she's saying, no, that vision is a function of compassion and compassion is a function of vision. When you see, really see, you just love. What does she mean? I'm seeing all the time, but I'm not really loving. But the point is, what kind of seeing is she talking about right now? When I'm seeing through the lens of myself, my small self, my ego. I'm carrying the burden of my I into the moment. And I'm seeing the moment with the burden of my I, with the expectations of my I, with the disappointments of my I in the moment, my feeling of I like this, I want to be here more, or I don't like this, I want to be somewhere else. So most of the times, I'm not with the moment. I'm not with the object of love. I'm with my sense of I. When I can drop that sense of I and pay bare attention to the moment, then I'm really seeing it. They are not really two things. Each is a function of the other. When you see, really see, you just love. If you pay bare attention to anything, just in the act of paying bare attention to something, love arises because bare attention is awareness, Purusha. And the fabric of that awareness is love. When you love, really love, you just see. You see things as they are, not as you expect. And in that wide open space is love. This is the kind of love that everyone wants, the kind that everything needs. It is love at first sight, unconditioned by definitions or demands. Nothing can come between the pure seeing, not even a hairbreadth of difference. The moment a difference comes, I'm here, what I'm looking at there, the pure seeing is destroyed. In the pure seeing, the seer and the object seen arise as one field. Judgment or nothing can come between the pure seeing, not even a hairbreadth of difference. Judgment or hesitation, not the filter of so called understanding or an extra layer of elaboration, just the streaming of light unhindered by what you might otherwise stop and think. So beautiful this is if you get it. I'm reading it again. You'll get it if you just pay attention to the words. These things can't be explained, they speak directly to your being. The awakened mind has two attributes. One is compassion, what some would call love. The other is clarity, what some would call sight. They are not really two things. Each is a function of the other. When you see, really see, you just love. When you love, really love, you just see. You see things as they are, not as you expect. And in that wide open space is love. This is the kind of love that everyone wants, the kind that everything needs. It is love at first sight, unconditioned by definitions or demands. Nothing can come between the pure seeing, not even a hairbreadth of difference, judgment or hesitation, not the filter of so called understanding or an extra layer of elaboration, just the streaming of light, unhindered by what you might otherwise stop and think. When you see your life, you bring it to life. So beautiful. Normally, we are not seeing our life, we are just seeing ourselves, our concerns, our self regard, our self absorption. You have to stop seeing yourself, then you see life. And when you see life, you bring it to life. When you don't see your life, it seems lifeless. When you're only looking at this non existent I, life seems lifeless, dull, bored. You get bored not of life, But you get bored when you close your doors to life, when you're only looking at yourself and not at life around. Because when you don't look at yourself and you look at life, there are truly no ordinary moments. Every moment is an ordinary miracle. But to see that ordinary miracle in every moment, you have to let go of your obsession with your I, with your sense of me, myself, my needs. I'll pause here if you have any questions or anything to share. Okay, then we can continue. So this is Karen Miller's master, Zen master, Mezumi Roshi. Mezumi introduced me to a dimension of love that we do not often experience. His love was not administered in the guise of charity or sympathy. He did not even serve as a counselor, advocate, or intermediary. He had no suggestions for how I could improve myself. He simply sat in a room. When he rang the bell, you could enter, sit in front of him, and be seen. So beautiful, she said, and be seen. How many people really see you? So often, when you're conversing with people, you lose interest in talking to them because you realize that they are not listening to you. They are so wrapped up in the narratives in their head that they are only paying you 20% of the attention. Either they are thinking of a clever reply to make to you in response to what you're saying while you've hardly said it, or they are just wrapped up in their thoughts. They are not really present to you. And you don't feel like talking to them because they are not present to you. If they are not present to you, they are not present in that field of love and oneness that joins both of us. He had no suggestions for how I could improve myself. He simply sat in a room. When he rang the bell, you could enter, sit in front of him, and be seen. The two of us would talk a little and laugh or cry, whatever. Gradually, I would relax and stop trying to make an impression. So beautiful. If somebody gives you that kind of unconditional attention, that you don't feel the need to make an impression on him because his energies tell you that you're fully accepted and loved, whether you make an impression or not. His kindness was the profound kindness of seeing a person or thing completely without judgment. I learned two things by this: that it is rare to be seen, and that seeing without judgment is an act of love. It is so rare that a person really sees you without carrying the burden of himself to the moment. If he's not carrying the burden of himself, he's not carrying the burden of expectations, judgment, nothing, just bare attention. It is rare to be seen, and that seeing without judgment is an act of love. Why? This is a beautiful line that to see without judging is an act of love. Because the moment you perceive anything, you'll compare the perception with your memory bank, compare it to a known, or imagine a known, and then judge it as good or bad, pleasant or unpleasant, beautiful or ugly. And there the thing dies. They say, no, we've discussed this before. They say death of an author. Every time a reader reads a piece by the author dies because the reader will make his own narrative about what the author really meant. If you apply it to any object in life, the reality of the object dies the moment you interpret it, judge it, the object dies in its reality for you. Whatever appears in front of you is your liberation. It's real. It's God. That is until you judge it. then you imprison yourself again. Every time, you know, all the masters of ages have said that any object of creation can lead you to God, because every object of creation is really God. But the moment you judge it, you cut yourself away from its God nature. Whatever appears in front of you is your liberation. That is until you judge it. Then you imprison yourself again. This is very beautiful. I'm going to read it again. Just make it your own. Mezumi introduced me to a dimension of love but that we do not often experience. His love was not administered in the guise of charity or sympathy. We feel if people are charitable to us or sympathetic to us, it is love. But very often that sympathy or charity also comes from the person, because the person somewhere wants to feel good about himself in being kind to you. Nothing wrong with that. If that also wasn't there, the world would be a terrible place. But there's more to it than that. He did not even serve as a counselor, advocate, or intermediary. He had no suggestions for how I could improve myself. He simply sat in a room. When he rang the bell, you could enter, sit in front of him, and be seen. The two of us would talk a little and laugh or cry, whatever. Gradually, I would relax and stop trying to make an impression. His kindness was the profound kindness of seeing a person or thing completely without judgment. I learned two things by this: that it is rare to be seen, and that seeing without judgment is an act of love. How many things do we see without judging? And then can we really say we've loved for even one moment in our life? Whatever appears in front of you is your liberation. That is until you judge it. Then you imprison yourself again. Why? You know, Patanjali beautifully explains. He explains the three components of any thought. He calls a thought a chitta vritti. And he says that how is a thought formed? First, there is manas. Manas is perception. You see something, you hear something, it's perceived by your brain centers. Then there's buddhi. Buddhi, whatever the perception is, will be compared to something in your memory bank because you want to know. And we have this hideous idea that the moment we have labeled something, we know it, but we know nothing about it, right? If I show you a blade of grass, you'll recognize it as a blade of grass, but you don't really know what that blade of grass is, isn't it? But we allow ourselves the illusion that the moment we can label something, we know it. And then we cut ourselves away from it. So, manas is perception, buddhi is comparing our perception with something in our memory bank and labeling it. And then there's ahankar, the akar the aham takes. You'll immediately slot it as, I like this, I don't like this, this is good, this is bad, this is ugly, this is beautiful. And most of your thoughts are made up of these three components: manas, perception; buddhi, comparison with something in the memory bank to know it. We long to know what we see. We can't bear being with something with the fact that I'll never know it, but let me just be with it. And then there's ahankar. The moment I know something or fool myself that I know it, My ego will step in and say, I like this, I don't like this. This is good, this is bad, this is beautiful, this is ugly. So, for an enlightened person, perhaps it stops at pure perception, it stops at manas. The enlightened person has completely understood that I'll never know, and he's comfortable with not knowing. So, the moment he perceives something, he bows down to it in his inner space as this is God. I'll never know God. I can only love God. So I'm not going to bother to compare it with something in my memory bank, to recognize it, to label it, and then determine the like dislike relationship with it. So for an enlightened master like Mejumi, when he's with a person, there's pure perception, there's just pure attention. When Karen Miller would enter his room, his mind would not go into that old mechanism of, oh, this is Karen. She's a good student. She's a bad student. In the past, she said this. In the past, she didn't say this. All that will not be. He'll be present to Karen as a newborn of this moment. And he will be himself a newborn child of this moment. And he will interact with her as if both of them have been born in this moment without past baggage. And when he interacts with her like that, then there is no judgment, there is just alert attention. And that's why it is said to really see something without judgment is love. And to see something without judgment is to see something without ahankar, because that judgment, as we just talked about, is ahankar. I perceive something, I label it, and then I judge it with respect to myself, beneficial to myself, harmful to myself, flattering to myself, critical to myself. When all that happens, the same beautiful thing becomes my prison, not because the thing has changed, but the prison in my mind, which is my sense of I, which constantly judges, has again taken over. So the mother advises self-giving, self-forgetting, and self-giving as two important steps in the journey of integral yoga, steps of discovering happiness within. The sense of I often is like a mist of unhappiness and anxiety around me. The joke is, the I sense has no ontological reality, it is a mental construct. The more I feed it with self regard, the more agitated I get. Eckhart Tolle says that this I sense or the ego regards the present moment as an enemy. The understanding arose, this sense of I is fueled by my attention to it. And so it covets my attention and intensifies self regard. My ego is fueled by how much attention I pay to myself. The more attention I pay to myself, the more my ego is fueled. So my ego almost keeps trying to grab my attention. Grab attention. There's nothing like my attention. It tries to grab attention and intensifies self regard. If I pay attention instead to the object or person I'm interacting with at the moment, my attention is withdrawn from the I. The self regard dwindles. So, when I'm with anything, whether it's nature, whether it's a person, the more I'm thinking about myself, the less I can love nature, object, or the person. Because love is my capacity to pay bare attention to it. If my attention is absorbed in my self regard, I can't really pay attention to it. And as we've said in Sanskrit, love and joy are synonymous. The word for love in Sanskrit is ananda. So I could be in the most beautiful surroundings in nature. I could be with the most beautiful sunset. But if I'm thinking, oh, he said this to me, my future is bleak, my this is threatened, I won't find any beauty in it because there's no love. There's no attention I'm paying to it because I'm only paying attention to my narrative. Example one, when I fold a mat with self regard, anything you do, if you're doing it out of ahankar, it is all about getting it done so that I can get on to the next thing. I'm folding the mat thinking, chalo, let me get it out of the way so that I can go on to the next thing. I'm doing it thinking of myself, not about the mat. But instead of making the I as the focus of attention while folding the mat, if I make the mat the focus of attention and do it in a way that is best for the mat instead of best for me, self regard and the agitation it brings dwindles. And the power of now, which is the same as the power of love, is accessed. It's beautiful that toll refers to it as the power of now. But when you enter the power of now, what is the power of now? The capacity to pay complete attention to this moment. And we've said that to be present to anything completely without judgment is love. So the power of now is the same as the power of love. Example 2, when I wash the skin of the face, if I wash for my own sake, then I do it hurriedly. But if I can forget the sense of I and wash in a way that is best for the face, see, it's so funny. I think I am my face, but this for the sense of I don't know how to explain this. Let me try. Um, the sense of I is so isolated from what's really me that even when I'm washing my face and I'm very sort of engrossed in my sense of I wash my face without any love, without any attention, because I think I am that concept that I thought. I'm not even aware that the face is really part of this body. I'm more the I thought than what I'm handling. But if I can forget the sense of I and wash in a way that is best for the face, not best for me, self regard and the agitation it brings dwindles. And the power of now, which is the same as the power of love, is accessed. The whole essence of the Zen consists in walking along the razor's edge of now. To be so utterly, so completely present that no problem, no suffering, nothing that is not who you are in your essence can survive in you. This is so beautiful. If you're fully in the now, there's no narrative that can create a problem or a suffering. And that narrative which creates problem or the suffering is not who you are in your essence anyway. The whole essence of the Zen consists in walking along the razor's edge of now, to be so utterly, so completely present that no problem, no suffering, nothing that is not who you are in your essence can survive in you. In the now, in the absence of time, all your problems dissolve. Suffering needs time. It needs the past or the future. You have to either suffer thinking about the future or about the past. So suffering needs time. It cannot survive in the now. Sufis have a saying, the Sufi is the son of present. And Rumi, the great poet and teacher of Sufism, declares, past and present veil God from our sight, burn up both of them with fire. So this is all we have for today. If anyone has any questions or anything to share, you can unmute and ask or put it on the chat. Okay. Then, if there are no questions, let me just check the chat. Parizad, you've said preferences. What do you exactly mean? Okay. So let's sit up straight. Let's put the whole thing together for us. So we started by saying, by quoting mother's words, that depression is always a sign of acute egoism. And we went on to understand why does mother say this? Because egoism is not just arrogance, that's a very superficial way of understanding it. Ego or our sense of I is a sense of separation from the rest. Ego is self regard, the constant absorption in the thought, I, me, myself, what will I get, how will I progress, what will happen to me, etc. And the more we keep thinking about ourselves, the more we create narratives to make ourselves unhappy. And this is the fundamental dysfunction that Toll talks about. The dysfunction that makes me feel I am separate from the rest and creates insecurity, feeling threatened, need to compete to survive, etc. The Buddha says that if we live with this function, no matter where we go, we'll encounter suffering. And Sri Aurobindo beautifully says that the ego doesn't even have an ontological reality, it's a mental construct. Because he says everything we are on our outside is nature or prakriti. Everything we are on the inside is spirit or purusha. So if our inside and outside, there's no place for the ego is just a superimposition, an adhyaropa, a mental construct, which somehow the mind creates. The Einstein called our sense of I or the ego an optical illusion, an illusion of our seeing. So the Sufi would say that whenever you're on the road to hell of jealousy, ego, anger, remind yourself you don't exist as the ego. So what's the problem? And cut short that road to hell. So if I'm not the ego, what am I really? Jesus speaks of the I am, the aham, that one field of awareness which is omnipresent, which is present everywhere. Now, the moment thought comes into that aham, the ego is born. Patanjali explains it like this, that every chitta vritti or thought is made up of three components. There is manas, perception. You see, hear, sense something. And then there's buddhi, which compares the perception with something in your memory bank to label it, to know it. And then once you think you know it, your ahankar, the akar your aham takes, will step in to judge it as, I like this, I don't like this is fortunate, this is unfortunate, this is good, this is bad, and judgment will come in. So every thought in some way or the other will have some flavor of judgment. And that judgment is the ahankar, the akar, the Shuddh aham takes because of the optical illusion of I. But this is where our dysfunction comes in. Toll says, it has been said God is love, but this is not correct. God is the one life in and beyond countless life forms. Love implies duality, lover and beloved, subject and object. So love is recognition of oneness in the world of duality. And Sri Aurobindo defines love beautifully. Love is the yearning of the one for the one. And he says unity is the substance of the heart. So when we really are in this state of oneness or love, there is no judgment. Karen Miller beautifully says, when you love, really love, you just see. You see things as they are, not as you expect. And in that wide open space is love. When you see your life, you bring it to life. When you don't see your life, it is lifeless because you're not really seeing the present moment and the ordinary miracles it is abounding with. You are only seeing your narratives, your sense of I, and the constant judgment of reality that it brings. Karen Miller further says, whatever appears in front of you is your liberation. That is, until you judge it. Then you imprison yourself again. So if we can stop at pure perception, not try to know something. In fact, that's a very powerful practice from Vedanta, to observe without trying to know it. Because what will we really do by knowing it? We'll find a word that labels it. And the mind will trick us into thinking that once we've labeled it, we know it. But just because we label a blade of grass as grass, do we know it? Do we know the magic that makes up that blade of grass? But instead, if we lived our whole lives in gratitude, with a vision full of wonder, that everything my eyes falls on is God. And if I cannot know God with my intellect, I cannot know the objects I am seeing. I can only love them. Mother Teresa says this, when I judge, I have no time to love. So to love is to be present to reality, to life, relinquishing any attempts to know it, because I'll never know it. So when I interact with things on a daily basis, let me drop the sense of I just by recognizing it doesn't exist. It's an optical illusion of consciousness. And instead of paying attention to the I, instead of bringing the burden of the I to the moment, I pay full attention to the moment. Paying full attention to the moment without judgment is loving it. It's accessing the power of now. It's accessing the power of love.